lands beyond are cold and lonely. Far away as the stars.
Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time. If it is your first time, then please feel free to have a little look around. And if you like some of the other videos, that'd be awesome. There are some consistencies, like I did talk about the Twilight Zone a lot in my previous videos before I decided to review every single episode of the original series. So this is the second episode in my series of videos where I look at the original Twilight Zone series. That's the series that went from 1959 to 1964, 156 episodes. We're going to look at 6 episodes from episode 7. So there's already been one episode that's already been on the channel, and this is the second one. So this is really interesting because there are 3 of my favourite episodes in this little clump of episodes, and it's the first appearance of Charles Beaumont, and it's the first appearance of Richard Matheson as well. So lots to celebrate here with these 6 episodes. So let's crack on first with the first episode in this little batch, and that's an episode called The Lonely. The Lonely begins with this opening narration. Witness, if you will, a dungeon made out of mountains, salt flats and sand that stretch to infinity. The dungeon has an inmate, James A. Corrie, and this is his residence, a metal shack. An old touring car that squats in the sun and goes nowhere, for there is nowhere to go. For the record, let it be known that James A. Corrie is a convicted criminal placed in solitary confinement. Confinement, in this case, stretches as far as the eye can see, because this particular dungeon is on an asteroid 9 million miles from the Earth. Now witness, if you will, a man's mind and body shrivelling in the sun, a man dying of loneliness. So The Lonely is a really good episode and quite a dramatic one, quite a emotive one. It's got a great performance at the centre of it by Jack Warden and some really nice moments from Jean Marsh as well. And basically the idea that he's punished, this man's been done for murder and he's punished by getting put on this distant asteroid and is like condemned to be on his own and condemned to loneliness essentially for decades, is what the premise of the story is. And it's really effectively done because you've got some interesting characters that are visiting him to give him supplies and that, and you've got one that's kind of leading it that's a little bit sympathetic to his situation because he's not convinced that he was guilty, and you've got these other guys that are really funny with him, really aggressive to him because they see him as someone who deserves to be stuck in the middle of nowhere, penance for this crime that he's done. So you've got this really nice banter going around with those characters, and it's really effective, and it creates this sort of resentment that Jack Warden plays because he is so desperately lonely. And the way that plot develops is really nice because basically the guy that's a little bit sympathetic gives him a gift in one of the visits, and that gift is a robot, a female robot played by Jean Marsh, and that changes Jack Warden's situation. And in classic Twilight Zone style, the ending basically shows that even when it seems like there's some kind of resolve in the story, Twilight Zone can twist the knife again so it doesn't quite work out. It's really powerful. And I tell you what, the last bit of the episode is such a shock. It's really quite jarring. And again, you know, ahead of its time in many ways, because I don't know if I know any other examples from that period that would be so shocking in its finale in that story. So yeah, The Lonely, written by Rod Serling again, and fantastic episode. So the next one that I'm looking at is easily one of my all-time favourite episodes. It's one of the most generally seen as favourite episodes as well. It's an absolute classic, and it's actually the episode and the character that the band that I'm in is named after. So go back to 2006, April 2006, And me and Richie came up with the name Bemis because we were both, as you know, huge fans of the Twilight Zone, and we wanted to name our band after the Twilight Zone. So we came up with the name Bemis, which was in honor of Henry Bemis, who's the main character in this phenomenal episode called Time Enough at Last. Okay, this absolutely incredible episode, Time Enough at Last, starts with this opening narration. Witness Mr. Henry Bemis, a charter member in the Fraternity of Dreamers, a bookish little man whose passion is the printed page, but who is conspired against by a bank president and a wife and a world full of tongue cluckers and the unrelenting hands of a clock. But in just a moment, Mr. Bemis will enter a world without bank presidents or wives or clocks or anything else. He'll have a world all to himself, without anyone. So Time Enough at Last is a great performance from Burgess Meredith. I'm really big fan of Burgess Meredith anyway. I think he was amazing. And he actually appeared in 4 episodes of The Twilight Zone. And he did the narration, the opening narration in the movie, The Twilight Zone the movie as well. So he's got quite a strong link to The Twilight Zone. A very strong relationship with The Twilight Zone. But this is his first appearance. And wow, what an appearance. The idea is that there's this really bookish guy that just wants to read. That's all he wants to do is read. And I'm sure that other booktubers that are watching this, and maybe some people who watch a lot of booktube can relate to this. He just wanted to read. He couldn't get the time to do it, and he was reading while he was working at his bank, and his bank manager was telling him to stop reading and concentrate on the job and all that sort of stuff. And then in the end, through some quirk of fate, he ends up locked in a bank vault during essentially the nuclear holocaust. So he's the last person alive when he eventually leaves the bank vault, and he's got all this time to read all the books that he wants to read. And it's such a great story. And there's obviously the very famous ending. If you don't know the ending, I won't spoil it, but it's a very famous ending that's been parodied in Family Guy and in The Simpsons and lots of other things. It's one of those episodes that's a great example of what the Twilight Zone like to do. And the performance from Burgess Meredith really makes it. It really makes it so heartwarming, and you really do care about Henry Bemis. It's just so cool. This is actually written by Rod Serling, but it's based on a short story by Lynn Venables. So that's pretty cool that you see this now and again. He'll adapt a short story that was issued in a science fiction short story magazine a few years before that. So yeah, one of the best episodes ever, one of my all-time favorites, and an episode that is just timeless. It never ever dates. It's always brilliant. And again, like I've been saying in the previous video, it's the performances that make it really special. So Time Enough at Last. Okay, so the next one is another first appearance, and it's the first appearance by the writer Charles Beaumont. So the original 156 episodes were mostly written by Rod Serling, but he had a few other people write several episodes for the Twilight Zone, and one of them was Charles Beaumont, and his stories were really, really good and quite creepy. This one is one of his best, and the title is based on a Shakespearean line. It's called Perchance to Dream. Okay, so the episode Perchance to Dream begins with this opening narration. 12 o'clock noon, an ordinary scene, an ordinary city, lunchtime for thousands of ordinary people. To most of them, this hour will be a rest, a pleasant break in the day's routine. To most, but not all. To Edward Hall, time is an enemy, and the hour to come is a matter of life and death. And it's basically the story of a man played by Richard Conte who is desperately trying not to sleep, because if he sleeps, he will die, because there's someone in his dream that's trying to kill him. So this is 1959 now, and obviously this is many, many years before Freddy Krueger, but the person he is so frightened of is not quite as ugly as Freddy Krueger. And the way that it's directed, the actual tone of the episode is quite different. It's much creepier. It's quite surreal in places. It's got this sort of expressionistic style to it. And it's really interesting to watch as a piece of theatre, television theatre. And again, central performance is brilliant. The performance by the femme fatale character is really good as well. And yeah, just I think one of the important characters in the episode is the way it's directed, if you know what I mean. And that has a really important role to play in the storytelling of it as well. So yeah, fantastic story, and it's one of those stories that you think you know where it's going, but even though it does go where you think it's going to go, it's done so brilliantly that you don't feel like you've been cheated. So yeah, Perchance the Dream, Charles Beaumont's first appearance, and a great story. Okay, episode 10 is Judgement Night, and that starts with this opening narration. Her name is the SS Queen of Glasgow. Her registry British. Gross tonnage 5,000. Age indeterminate. At this moment she's 1 day out of Liverpool, her destination New York. Duly recorded on this ship's log is the sailing time, course to destination, weather conditions, temperature, longitude and latitude. But what is never recorded in a log is the fear that washes over a deck like fog and ocean spray. Fear like the throbbing strokes of engine pistons, each like a heartbeat parcelling out every hour into breathless minutes of watching, waiting and dreading. For the year is 1942, and this particular ship has lost its convoy. It travels alone like an aged blind thing, groping through the unfriendly dark, stalked by unseen periscopes of steel killers. Yes, the Queen of Glasgow is a frightened ship, and she carries with her a premonition of death. And Judgement Night is written by Rod Serling, and it's the first appearance really of Rod Serling's political angle. So he did write a few political episodes. Rod Serling was very clearly a liberal and would sometimes put that into his television plays, and sometimes it came into Twilight Zone in fantastic effect sometimes. Some of the best episodes, which I'll get to later, have got this sort of tone to them. But this is a really effective, powerful and atmospheric episode, Judgement Night. It's set in 1942, and it stars a man who is tormented on this boat by this idea that he knows it's going to sink. He knows this boat's going to sink. And ultimately, the what's happening to this character is essentially an elaborate punishment. So, and as I say, there's this sort of political angle, so you can probably imagine that it might be a reference to the Second World War, which it is. So yeah, interesting episode, really well done again, and the central performance is quite hysterical, and it's quite uncomfortable to watch in places. You've got this sort of desperation in the performance that really stands out and makes it quite uncomfortable viewing sometimes. So I think that's another thing that sort of takes it ahead of its time, I think, as well. Okay, so the 11th episode, and again, another one of my favourites. I love this episode so much. And it's called And When the Sky Was Opened. And this episode, And When the Sky Was Opened, begins with this opening narration. Her name, X-20. Her type, an experimental interceptor. Recent history, a crash landing in the Mojave Desert after a 31-hour flight 900 miles into space. Incidental data, the ship with the men who flew her disappeared from the radar screen for 24 hours. But the shrouds that cover mysteries are not always made out of a tarpaulin, as this man will soon find out on the other side of a hospital door. Okay, so this one is the first appearance of Richard Matheson. So Richard Matheson is one of my favourite authors. He's my joint favourite author, if you like, officially at the moment with Ray Bradbury. I absolutely love Richard Matheson so much. And he wrote quite a lot of episodes for the Twilight Zone. This is one where it wasn't at the point yet where he was writing the whole episode. He wrote the short story that Rod Serling then adapted. So the short story was called Disappearing Act. And then Rod Serling adapted that short story into this episode. And it's such a brilliant episode. It is such a brilliant episode. I've seen it so many times, and each time I see it, you kind of want to get inside the episode and change the events for the characters, because they are absolutely doomed. It's just brilliantly done, and there's no explanation. It's just weird, you know. It's it's science fiction because they come back from another planet, and there's some sense that they shouldn't have come back, but it's not science fiction in a particularly hard sciencey way. There's no explanation for it. The hard science is not present, but that adds to it. The mystery of it is what makes it so great. It's such a brilliant episode, and you've got these three astronauts that are in this hospital ward, having survived a crash landing in the desert, and they're basically recovering. One of them gets released early because he's okay. He can leave the hospital wards, and then the other two are left, and blah blah blah. But it doesn't quite work out like that, because somebody or something or just a Twilight Zone can't let them just leave the hospital ward. It's so brilliant. So yeah, and When the Sky Was Opened is definitely one you can look out for if you haven't seen it. Okay, so episode 12, which is the last one in this little batch, is also another one of my favorites. It's fantastic, and it's again very, very typical of what you'd expect from the Twilight Zone, but in a different way. Sometimes we've come up with some typical Twilight Zone episodes, but there's like different angles you might get. You might get some science fiction-y ones. You might get some mysterious, I don't know what's going on kind of episodes. You might get someone that's just a horrible person that gets his comeuppance, and you might get a really endearing character that has this horrible twist of fate given by him by the Twilight Zone. So you get these little regular go-tos, if you like, with the Twilight Zone, and this is definitely one of those. But it's so brilliant, and it's and I tell you what, again, it's a great central performance with the guy who's selling. It's another peddler episode, like the One for the Angels. One for the Angels. There's another peddler episode. So there's a guy that's selling stuff in the street. But he kind of starts off by selling in the cafe, and it's called What You Need. And the opening narration of What You Need is this. You're looking at Mr. Fred Renard, who carries on his shoulder a chip the size of the national debt. This is a sour man, a friendless man, a lonely man, a grasping, compulsive, nervous man. This is a man who has lived 36 undistinguished, meaningless, pointless, failure-laden years, and who at this moment looks for an escape, any way, anything, anybody to get out of the rut. And this little old man is just what Mr. Renard is waiting for. What You Need is all about this character that knows what individuals need. He goes up to them, and you might give them something really innocuous that you'd think, well, why is that important? Like a pen or a pair of scissors or something like that. And very soon after that, it's obvious that they did need it. And it's genuinely what they need the most. And it's just beautifully played. And somebody tries to take advantage of him, and you get into this relationship that he desperately wants to get out of. It's so brilliant. And interestingly enough, this is written by Rod Serling, but it's based on a short story by somebody called Lewis Paget. But Lewis Paget is a pseudonym, and that's actually Henry Kuttner and C.L. Moore. So they collectively gave him that name, and they wrote this episode, What You Need. So I think that's really interesting. And again, it's got this really lovely feel to it. You really care for the peddler, and you really don't like the main antagonist in this, the guy that's trying to manipulate the peddler. And it's just got this really gorgeous ending. And yeah, it's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it's quite nice that at the moment I've done 12 episodes with this video and the last video, and I haven't come across one that's like a really weak episode. There are a few weak episodes in the whole 156 episodes. There's not many, but there is some. So I will be honest when I get to those. But at the moment, this beginning of season 1 is really, really strong. And again, it's the performances, it's the way it's directed, it's the music as well. The music is really powerful, often by Bernard Herrmann, and the writing. The writing is phenomenal. So there you go. That's the next episode of my deep dive into these 156 episodes of the Twilight Zone. Please comment below if you know these episodes. The fact that this particular video featured Time Enough at Last and When the Sky Was Opened made me very excited to do the video. But what you need is another favourite of mine. It's a really, really nice batch of episodes. And how awesome is the Twilight Zone? Stay curious, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Paint me a picture